Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this opening MIPCOM 2017 session, Defining a Hit, New Matrix for Success. I'm the editor of TBI magazine, Television Business International. My name's Jesse Whittock, and today I'm joined by a fantastic panel of minds who are considering what it really means to create a hit in the kind of on-demand, four-screen world that we're dealt with today. So just to begin, a couple of house rules. We're not going to be taking questions from the floor, but if you do want to speak to the guys, which I imagine many of you will do, please feel free to come and talk to them at the end. They'll be here for 15 minutes or so, I'd imagine. And the format will work as each company has a slightly different take on this whole debate and topic, each will be given 5 minutes on the floor to explain to you what they're doing around sort of defining what it is to create a hit in 2017 and beyond. So just to let you know who everyone is, to my left is Warid Seager. He's the CEO of Para Analytics, based in New Zealand and LA. To his left, we have Hema Patel, who's the managing director of SVOD service Lightbox. And to her left, we have Frederick Valpuet, who is the VP of Eurodata TV Worldwide. And Frederick is going to kick us off with a slide presentation on what Eurodata have been up to. So, Frederick, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This morning it will not be a rugby match between New Zealand and France with a British referee. So there is no fear of being injured or any fight in the playground, no problem. But it's going to be much less fun than a rugby match because we're going to talk about audience, and audience is a serious matter. So just as a short introduction this morning, I would like to present you the fundamental of content measurement. Because in more than 100 countries in the world, TV industry have set a unit of reference. And I think it's quite important that we share that with you. So this unit of reference, of measurement, of ratings, is built usually by an independent third-party company like Nielsen in US, or Nielsen in New Zealand, Numeris in Canada, Barb in UK, Médiamétrie in France. And these third-party companies are built with core components with a panel, a technology, a meter usually, and joint industry rules. And so this core component enables the TV industry to get a unit of reference and every day a currency is printed. And this currency, it's either ratings for the content production companies, or it's GRP for the advertising market. And for both part of the ecosystem, the media ecosystem, either advertising market or the content production, and you're part of the content production, there is a need of a unit of reference. So, but this unit of reference process was based on TV consumption, and as we know, usage are evolving, and content measurement is now evolving, and that's the subject of this morning. So after started from the TV set, we are now talking about a total video measurement. And what is this total video measurement? So historically, first we had this very basic measurement on TV set with a panel, and we were measuring live. And then we moved to a more complex one, where we started to measure online screen, PC, mobile, tablet in silos, and the consumption of what we call catch-up TV or time-shifted viewing sometimes. And for doing this, we need online panel data, platform data, and the panel data, and we hybrid it. But a dream came through recently, and now we have a unified four-screen measurement data, and this is possible only because of a complex process. I won't go into details this morning, using both panel data and platform data. And this four-screen measurement, today, some countries, here is a map of the country who are already measuring four-screen measurement. So four-screen is measured, the pioneer country where Netherlands and France. And in the coming months, around 50 countries are going to measure this new way of looking at television. US, UK, Germany, Singapore, Japan is already measuring it. So more and more countries are going in this way. But the question you may have, and this is a right question, what are the programs which take the most benefit of this, four-screen measurement? Because this is the question of everyone today. So when we crunch the data, and currently we are only able to crunch data from Netherlands and France because it's the country where the data is public, we have identified three kinds of program, or three kinds of genre, which could take the most benefit of these new usages. So we could talk about that later on during the panel, and I could give you, really example on these three examples. But we have a local daily show who take benefit of four-screen. We have some international drama hits targeting, young adults, and also some reality drama also targeting your audiences and usually on the specific channels. So as a conclusion of my first 5 minutes, could see that now audience analysis can be done in 3Ds. And for this, everyone needs new glasses. And we could help you to have these new glasses. First, the first axis and the first lever we have is when. And the new when is not only what time, but also is it time shifted? I mean, replay, catch up, is it live? Second lever, targets. So this is more traditional, but today we know that there are new segments and new targeted to be addressed. And thirdly, and this is a new lever for the industry, on which device? And this is a new challenge for many people in the room, for any head of acquisition or head of programming, is how to use this 3 dimension to attract the right audience at the right time on the right device. So later in the panel, I will try to give you more examples of this kind of show. Thank you for your attention.
Now, Warid, you also look at audience measurement, and but from a slightly different angle. So why don't you tell us about what Parrot's been up to in the last couple of years?
Sure, I think was it Hema's reel up next?
Oh, okay, sorry. In fact, we're going to go over to Hema. Hema, why don't we, sorry, let's, I think that might have been my mistake. Do apologise.
Can we have the clip, please?
We should be having a VT from Lightbox.
We only wanted to make the world better.
Better.
Better never means better for everyone. Our species is dying.
Together we can change the world. And there's nothing they can do to stop us.
Goodbye, Clem.
Could you get pot for me? No, hide things from me, please.
You can just start again. And you never look back. Party.
Yeah, baby, Butch and Sundance are back.
The two of you together are terrifying.
Thank you. Call the Emmys, baby.
Never bad to be early, except in death and taxes.
Have a boarding house for young ladies.
Party's over.
Do you guys remember that girl, Chantal Witherbottom?
Oh, she sucked.
I'm gonna find her. Do you really still not see what dangerous ground this is?
My babies. I have a lot to be thankful for.
You gotta give the people what they want.
Surely that deserves a round of applause. So I'm Hema, as Jesse mentioned earlier, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of a story around Lightbox. We are a New Zealand-based subscription VOD service, and we are New Zealand's fastest growing service. We've been in business for 3 years now. So a couple of the unique points, and I will get onto content measurement in a second, was that we were incubated in a sort of an innovation hub. And for us, that meant that we had green fields. We were able to build a business using new technology, using new thinking, using some of the agile and lean sort of development methodology. So, relatively unique in our market in New Zealand, and that was 3 years ago. We have the best-in-class content, and my content team is here with us today, and hats off that you saw some of that the shows earlier. Just fantastic content, and content is ultimately what drives a business like ours. I made a point there about being a relatively small market. We have 4.5 million people in New Zealand, and when you think about the big guns such as Netflix, that's scale is a really interesting thing because not everything can work in a market that small. So for us, there's been lots of challenges in trying to figure out how to crack that, and we've learned a lot. If I talk about what we've learned, and I see that I'm seated in between Frederic and Warried, which is actually quite interesting because I think that what we do in Lightbox is a mixture of using both forms of measurement of audiences and content. But ultimately, any kind of a TV business, and I'm talking to all of you that I'm sure know this, is hinged on the content. So if the content is good, the audience will come. What makes content good? Those are the 3 factors I've listed there. Variety of content, so having a broad breadth. Recency, so how new is that content, and how easy is it to access? And I can't overemphasize how important experience is. So I've listed it as the bottom point there, but the experience being the customer user journey. How quickly can I play some video? Is it going to buffer? Can I find what I want easily? All of those navigational aspects, which is for a TV company, something that perhaps we've never considered before, absolutely critical because you've got, literally sort of 3 to 5 seconds to capture your audience. And if you don't crack it, if your service is buffering, you're going to lose the audience. Some of them will come back because ultimately you've got some great content and the content will sell. But talkability around content is both drives customers and also advocacy for a product like ours. So how do you create a hit show and sort of bringing it back to sort of the topic of discussion for today, and listening to Frederic and Warried as one of our partners with Lightbox, using a broad range of audience measurement systems and information is absolutely critical. And I've sort of posed a question there about art versus science, and it's actually a mixture of both. And when you think about content and TV people who are intrinsically artistic, creative, they are projects of passion that often are created in content. How do you bring that science element through and for it to still be relevant to an audience? We created and I've sort of listed a few different ways that we measure engagement or the way that we measure success. And I'll touch on, I'm going to give you an example. I'll give you 2 examples actually. I'm going to talk fast. Usage data. So Paw Patrol, which is the animated children's show there, we decided last year to remove that from our service because we wanted to put that funding elsewhere into buying other kinds of content. We actually lost customers as a result, and we learned through that experiment that sometimes the content that you don't know that your customers absolutely value is the stuff that keeps them with your service. And so we brought it back very quickly, and it's been in our top 5 for over a year now. Another example, and I've mentioned Parrot Analytics there, but The Handmaid's Tale, which is a show that's reached some critical acclaim, we were looking at that with Parrot for, 6 to 9 months prior to buying the show, and we got some really interesting sort of audience metrics that helped us make that decision. It's been so successful for us. And my time is up.
Okay, round of applause, please. And now, Warried, we will pass over to you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a nice segue, absolutely. Let's see if this works. While we get that up, I just want to go on the record saying that I think we all know who would win in a rugby match between the All Blacks and France.
It's dangerous for us usually, so we
yeah. So
we prefer to
just want to make sure that we're on the same page there. Yeah. Cool. So my name is Ward, and today what I want to talk to you about just very briefly is this. I think Hema summarized it really well, that today's business is a mixture of arts and science, and where we come into it is a science bit. So the science of popularity and what that means. And so I'll give a couple of examples. I think Handmaid's Tale was a great example as well. But essentially what we do as a company is try to quantify this relationship between content and consumers. And this relationship is becoming increasingly more complex, increasingly more nuanced around the world, right? And I think every single person in this room, as part of our daily jobs, are making decisions about content in some way, shape, or form, whether it's buying content, selling content, marketing content, advertising content, partnering with content, and what have you. And understanding this relationship and its very nuanced complexity is becoming increasingly important. And what I mean by that is what used to be a really simple question is now increasingly more difficult to answer. What is popular in today's world? And if you think about historically, popularity meant viewership. It meant, a program does really well, high viewership, high number of people watching it, it's really popular. Well, that's great. And of course, we have more and more developments in the viewing, consumption, measurement services. But then also on the other side, we have this increasingly complex world of engagement where people are engaging with content as well. And then now we're getting this hybrid in the middle where, if Facebook launches a Facebook original on its TV watch platform, then you can both consume the content but also engage with it on the same platform. So it's a hybrid of viewership and engagement. What does that really mean? So this question of popularity is becoming increasingly more complex to answer, because if you ask a linear network, what does popular mean to you? They'll say, oh, my ratings, because that's my ad revenue, that's my bread and butter. But if you ask a Lightbox, an SVOD service, or Netflix, what does popular mean to you? I mean, they couldn't care less about the linear viewership of a show, right? For them, it's about customer acquisition, it's about customer retention, so customer engagement on their SVOD platform. And so our approach is to say, all right, well, we wanted to create this measurement system that became globally ubiquitous and equally applicable for an SVOD platform as well as a linear TV platform. And this is how we went about doing it. We said, how do people engage and view and consume content in today's world? And there's 4 billion people connected to the internet. Now, very soon, the entire planet is going to be everything we have is connected. And through that medium, people engage, consume, and interact with content in different ways. Some of them pirate it, some of them stream it, some of them watch trailers, some of them research it, some of them critique it and then rate it, and what have you. And so we said, all right, let's try to capture as many of these different sources as possible. So that includes the social media, that includes all the blogs, that includes piracy, that includes video streaming, and research, and wiki views, and what have you. And let's actually combine all the signals together, and let's filter out the noise, because there is a lot of noise out there. And so what we developed is a system which we call Demand Rank, which filters out the noise that basically says, you know what, if you watch 3 back-to-back episodes of a TV show, that's a much stronger signal of demand than if you press retweet on something, right? Because watching 3 back-to-back episodes of a TV show takes 3 hours of investment of your time, and pressing retweet takes 3 seconds. And so one of them is noise, the other one is actually true representation of demand. So we developed a system which allows us to filter out the noise and then combine all the signals together into a single metric system. So today we process over 1 billion data points a day from every country on the planet in over 100 languages, and we turn it into the industry's only global cross-platform measurement system. So measurement system is able to do things around the world. You can ask it questions like, what are the top 5 shows in the US in early September? What are the top 5 shows in China in June, right? And then again, in China, you'll see a bunch of Chinese shows, a Korean show, and a US show, right? This is a market that's notoriously difficult to measure things in. You can measure now the entire demand for an entire platform, even in markets where the platforms don't even exist, which I think is one of the increasingly complex things that the industry is facing. You can say, well, what are the genre trends in France in a given time period? So it turns out in 2015, the French were really into their fantasy and mystery dramas, but not into their science fiction or historical dramas, right? You can go to South Korea and say, what are the most popular content in South Korea? And most of it is local content, right? And so having this ubiquitous system of measurement that works across all platforms, across all types of content, allows us to say, hey, let's compare a Korean TV show versus a US premium hit and see how well they're doing over time and how they respond to various events, marketing campaigns, and what have you. So all of this, and we'll talk more about, is just basically quantifying this relationship of content and consumers around the world, which I think you summarized it really well when you said it's a combination of art and science. So that's me. Thanks very much.
Round of applause for Warwick. So what's clear about all of this is there is clearly much more for everyone to think about than there was, let's say, 15 years ago when the linear hits was what everyone was still chasing. So this is probably a question more for the research companies here. But you've obviously approached looking at data in slightly different ways, but it seems like you're coming to the same conclusions. So if you take everything that you're doing together, how can a buyer or a seller take that data and really apply that to what they're doing? Because obviously, metrics are important, but there needs to be a system for people to actually apply this stuff.
Yeah, today it's the ratings. It's a meeting between a program and a consumer, and how long is a program show? The length is very important because we know that the time you spend in front of a program is very specific. So for buyers and acquisition and also salespeople, the complexity is perhaps this 3D example. So we've got some example here to show you this kind of new programs, the new hit with this 4-screen, because I think this is the complexity of the new market, and perhaps we could show examples. This is shows, for example, which have been very good, which make very good performance on new usages. And that's the complexity of the new business. We take two local daily show, for example. Local daily soap is a good example where replay, catch-up TV, plus 4-screen is working. And in the example of TF1, you have an additional 900,000 new viewers. And it was not, the case before. Before you only had the live consumption, and now today we see that the new habits are taken, and it enables you, in some case, if you have the right program. It's the same in Netherlands with a famous, the local daily soap called Good Times, Bad Times. In this case, it's an additional around 200,000 people. So you see that some type of program, I've got another example here with some international dramas. Some international dramas, when they are focusing on the right targets, on the right channel, like Empire, the Fox program, which is a very program targeting young adults, you had an additional plus 35% of this new screen. It's the same as Homeland Season 5. Homeland Season 5 worked very well in Netherlands on 4-screen. So it's usually on mobile and on your tablets. And the third genre I would like to focus this morning is reality show. Reality show is also an audience driver on these new usages. And that's interesting because it shows that, for example, you have the example here of Temptation Island. It's almost double, the audience in Netherlands. And in France, a reality daily show almost, double its audience also with an additional 600,000 viewers. So this is a complexity. How do I know my program will work on a mobile? How will I know my program will work on a PC? And today, I think, it's a paradoxical work. You need more data because you need data on mobile, you need data on tablet consumption, you need ratings, but do you need all the data? And that's a question because you can't be lost in too many data, and you need accountable data, let's say. So that's I don't know if it's answers, but we start to have an answers to how is the new usages today.
And Warid, I'm sure you've got some views on this as well.
Yeah, so I think, your question was, how do buyers and sellers use this data?
How do you apply this
How do you
stuff?
apply it
Absolutely.
to the program sales and program acquisition process? And I think you take it like you look at two people sitting across the table to make it very actionable for the audience, and most people here are sitting on either one side of the table to sort of focus on the question. On the seller side, you're selling, if I'm a salesperson for a studio or distributor and I'm selling a program, and you're the local buyer, you're sitting across the table, and I'm going to you and I'm saying, hey, I've got this new program, it's the best thing since sliced bread, look at the little promo, you'll love it, it's fantastic, it's awesome. The problem that most people here face is that oftentimes I'm trying to sell the program to you and you're trying to buy it in your local market before the show has even aired in that market. You're buying it so you can air it in your market. And I think that's
it's guesswork, effectively, in a sense.
before we were around, it was guesswork, right? So it's before you had an ability to say, hey, let me search, for that program and see how much demand there is for it in that market, so that as a buyer, I can inform my acquisition decision. I can inform my pricing negotiation decision. And as a seller, I'm also armed with the tools to say, so that I can prove to you that even before the show has even aired in your market, I can say, hey, Jesse, look, this show actually has massive demand in your markets. You should really buy it before your competitor does in your local markets. And then on the flip side, as a buyer, you can do the same as well.
And Hema, I get you guys, you're working
On
with
the buy
Parrot
side.
on this exact sort of stuff, sort of informing yourself ahead of meetings, really.
Yeah, and look, we've learned a lot. We've been working with Parrot since launch virtually, so almost 3 years, and we've seen that our own thinking has evolved around how we buy content and how we launch content on our service. So there's also the element of how do you maximize your audience size or your viewership or your engagement, and in the way that you firstly buy, secondly program and schedule, and then thirdly release content, because all of those things can actually be managed quite differently. And it's almost taking all of the information out there and making a really calculated and educated guess, ultimately, or risk. And some of those pay off and some of those don't pay off. And sometimes something that should rate incredibly well just doesn't. But on the other hand, something that didn't look like it was going to do particularly well on paper, it just does. And we get that more right than we get wrong, so it's quite good, but perhaps that's because we're a few years old now. I don't know if that kind of...
I mean, effectively, I think you summarized it really well in that you're de-risking the decision, right? It's all about de-risking. You'll never get 100% right as a buyer. You're always going to have hits, really, your licensed content that you'll pay a lot for it and it works really well and makes you look like a superstar. And the goal is to have more of those than flops, right?
Absolutely,
And
that's
it's just
what you hear from everyone.
basically. So
Yeah.
it's to the extent that you can provide enough data to both the buyer and the seller to inform that decision, so that effectively you can de-risk that decision as much as possible.
What we see from our clients as a buyer or seller, they are, there is two drivers. One is they want to have content insight and to be sure that they have the right audience driver in the program. So this is an editorial analysis. But more and more, there is also this, I was having a conversation with an American studio yesterday, and they need data-driven info, because there is, every head of programming or acquisition now is to report to his financial department and say, okay, could you tell me the return on investment on this acquisition? So, and it means advertising revenues, it means subscription, it means monetization on the mobile, it means, and it's more complex because so you need data to be sure that you will justify your investment on acquisition. And it makes the job of you much more complex today because you have new criteria to take into account.
So is it sensible to think of all of these different things as separate silos? So should anyone still be thinking, I should commission directly for mobile, or I should commission directly for a laptop or TV? Or is it becoming clearer now that there is potentially a way of finding a sweet spot somewhere in there that works across all platforms? What do you think, Hema?
So I've got a pretty clear view on this one, and it ultimately comes down to what the business objective is. And if I think about platforms like Facebook and YouTube, their objective is about engagement of more people ultimately, versus a linear service which is about a scheduled audience viewing at 7:30 in the evening. And so it can be different strokes, different for different businesses depending on what your commercial outcome is. And ours is about keeping eyeballs on our services for longer. One thing I find really interesting, and I've been thinking about this more and more recently, is businesses, some of the content that we're buying, and certainly I noticed it with a couple of shows on Netflix recently, those episode lengths are kind of getting well over 60 minutes. And as a content maker, potentially there's an opportunity to keep that audience with your service for longer just by making by making the episode longer, versus something like Facebook, which has got, you know, a 2 or 3 minute clip here and there, and which is quite a different metric. And so when you're thinking about success metrics for those two very different pieces of content, they're completely different because of what the business objective is. So I'm not sure it's straightforward enough to talk about a device, but I think there are we do see trends around different devices, and you know, the younger customers tend to use Android devices more, for example, versus our older customers who tend to use big screens. So there is a device aspect involved there, but it really comes down to what the business is trying to drive, in my view.
I'm not sure we should think silos currently. It's TV set remains the main, you know, the main device and the main screen, and when all day long there is no question regarding TV consumption. Then after, when you want to be sure that you're targeting the right audience, the right community, we know that, for example, currently from the data we have, children channels, the tablet is the first device among, you know, PC, mobile, and tablets. For young adult channels, today mobile seems to be quite strong versus PC and tablet. So it's starting to be much complex. You know, this cube I tried to show, as I tried to explain you, as I touched on earlier, this cube dimension now, 3D, it's really complex. I don't think we're going to buy only content for mobile. It's the other way around. I think every broadcaster now try to find a way to engage people on the mobile, to develop an app, I don't know if you have noticed, for example, recently NBC has launched Left Field. It's a program for Facebook content, done by the NBC News team. It's a specific business unit. So it's mobile content, but because they take the benefit of the big NBC know-how. So I think it's more tactical thing that, you know, just decide, okay, I will only buy content for mobile. It's a hard mixture to do, and that's the you know, the hard stuff for everyone.
Yeah, I think you're getting a clear trend, and it's probably, you're never going to think of it as content just for mobile, content just for, you know, PC versus laptops. I think to summarize it, certainly from how I look at the industry and its, you know, evolution over the last 4 or 5 years and where it's going towards, this is summarized by 2 challenges that the industry is facing. One is measurement, right? It's measuring, understanding how much demand there is for any piece of program anywhere in your local market. And 2 is discovery and recommendations, right? So you're never going to license content just for a particular device. However, certain content performs better on certain devices towards certain demographics, and you want to capitalize on that. So I think discovery is the next big challenge that the industry needs to solve, which I think answers that question, but not from a commissioning point of view, simply from a technological. We now understand that if someone is logging in on an SVOD platform on a Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon, then they're probably logging in for their kids, because that's what we see mostly. And so we're going to recommend to them kids content at that time of day when they log in on that. So it's just contextual understanding.
Is that understanding the actual human behavior behind consumption? Yeah, I think it's interesting.
And leveraging the content towards that.
When I think about the type of work that you guys are doing, it must be an increasingly difficult space to know where to approach, because, you know, just in the last year we've just talked about Facebook and Apple clearly, you know, ready to spend a whole bunch of money on content, and it's certainly in the case of Apple, we're not even sure where they're going to put that stuff. So when you think about how you then apply some sort of measurement tool towards that, it must be very difficult to kind of second guess what's happening, because it seems like the level of disruption is really increasing, sort of more so than ever.
Absolutely, and it's why we exist, right? And you know, you've seen that over the past few years, this is becoming more and more complex, and having this holistic view of demand for content, you just need to have it, because you know what, like, no one is accessing what certain SVOD platforms' consumption data is. As an SVOD platform, you know, if you and I are running Netflix, we have no incentive to release our consumption data. Hema has no incentive to release her consumption data to the local market. And so when you look at existing measurement services, it becomes literally impossible to be able to compare how a show on an SVOD platform is doing versus a show on a linear platform. So that's why we take the sort of platform agnostic view of saying, you know what, we're just going to measure the population's demand for that title, regardless of where the title airs. And I think there's a bunch of examples. I remember when you guys first launched, you had House of Cards on Lightbox, and that's a title, and you're curious to the content team at Lightbox doing it, but that's a Netflix original series that was exclusively available on Lightbox before Netflix launched in the market. And even when Netflix launched in the market, they had to wait until the license ran out which I think for 1 or 2 seasons, correct me if I'm wrong, that House of Cards was exclusively available on Lightbox. So here's an example where you have Netflix original series that's available exclusively on a competing platform to Netflix in a local market. And so when you think about, to answer your question about the increasing complexity, this becomes so complex that the title 2 years later moves from Lightbox and goes to Netflix and suddenly has a whole new audience, a whole new demographical consumption of it on the ASVO platform. And so being able to track the demand for the title throughout the market and over time becomes increasingly important to do it in a cross-platform way, because it's going to jump between platforms and so on. And maybe there's a day when it just doesn't air in New Zealand for some reason. There's still going to be demand for it. We were talking earlier before the panel about how we're seeing demand for titles that aren't even available in some local markets. So, how do you look at that? We saw Skam as a Norwegian drama that has massive demand in English-speaking markets, even before there were English subtitles for it. And so it's just becoming so convoluted and exciting at the same time.
Regarding video on YouTube and Facebook, I think it's an interesting subject, because first we have to, first it's different from real ratings, because it's only a views, and behind the views, what do you have? You have an IP address usually. You don't know who is looking at. You don't know if it's a woman, a man, a boy, could be or whoever. So that's the first question we have, and secondly, Facebook. If you have seen 1 second on a video on Facebook, it's already viewed it's counted as 1 view. So 1 second, the length of viewing is a really big issue for the industry now, for you. I don't know if you have seen recently in June, in UK, which is in London, is always it's a good media hub for that. In UK in June, the voice of advertisers and the voice of agency have asked for more transparency to people, to the social network and so on, because it's not, they want to have an accountable data regarding Facebook and YouTube and so on. And some advertisers have even stopped to invest on Facebook because they say we want to be sure that the data we have, it could be comparable to TV ratings, for example. And they want this proprietary data from Facebook and Google to be measured, to be audited, to be transparent. And this is, I think, the trend in many markets. It's also the trend in US. It's a trend in France. Because if we only have proprietary data, and that's the point of Netflix also, it's hard for the industry to work. It's not possible for the advertising industry to work and to monetize content, and it's hard for you when you're dealing with content, acquisition, and if you don't have any levels of, ratings to deal with. So I think it will be very interesting to see how it's going on, because when the voice of advertiser and the voice of media agency and big players like Procter & Gamble have stopped to spend on Facebook because what does that mean? What does this view means? So we have to, of course, we have to look at it, because there will be some video on Facebook, and that's a kind of place where we have to be interested in. But I think it's more transparency and the need of a third party, an independent third party, which is giving the rating and this unit of reference, will be key in this new world of digital video.
Because effectively, at the end of all of this, what everyone's looking to do is monetize these clicks, right? And it must be increasingly difficult to do that. I mean, I suppose for an SVOD platform, you have a clear end goal. You want more users. You want more just subscriptions. That's a clear thing. But you still must, Hema, have to look at things like that and consider what that will mean for the SVOD model in 5 years' time, because it's changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess my observation in sort of some of the discussion today is we're thinking about this as an either-or in some cases, and it's not. It's both. So we can have a household where people are on Facebook watching 2 to 3 minute clips, as well as having a linear, perhaps it's the news on in the background. Once the news finishes, perhaps the children are going off to bed and we're watching some longer form content, and we might be watching 2 or 3 different episodes across different services. And so it's the viewing time and share of viewing is increasing. Traditional systems of measurement have, and I'm using Nielsen as a reference point, have only really measured one form and in one way. And as that becomes less and less relevant, trying to make sense of different other types of information actually doesn't take away from me in my business. It's absolutely about taking all of that information and making a decision based on it. So do we advertise on Facebook? Yes, we do. Do we know what our return on investment is? Kind of. Is there somewhere else we put that money to still get that same share of viewing or share of audience? Possibly, but would it be as good? I don't think so. So, as a business, we sort of experiment and learn, and, we're small and we're pretty agile, so we can make different decisions as we go as well. So I think there is space to consider all of that. It is incredibly complicated, but that doesn't mean you don't need to be right every time. You don't have to make the perfect decision every time. You can try a few things out, learn from your audience. We do market research every quarter. So to your point, Frederic, about not knowing anything about our customer, we don't know anything apart from their email address. So learning what our customers are doing, what those trends are over time through research, understanding what kinds of things they're looking for online through our work with Parrot, but also that we have a content team that has 25 to 30 years of experience, and you can't take away from that. So bringing all of those things together helps us to make some really great choices.
I wonder, with much of the research and data available, if it skews more sort of too heavily towards the kind of younger millennial audiences, that maybe even the Gen Z or Gen Z audiences, and how difficult is it to understand what the slightly older demographics are doing, across screens? Because obviously a lot of them are still watching linear TV, but there's plenty of them who aren't. And I wonder, is it difficult to sort of understand their behavioural patterns?
Yes, I think it all depends on how large a sample you're looking at, and so you want to be able to cater for both sides. And so we do a lot of work with major studios and networks like the BBC and AE networks, who all have content like historic old content, or nature documentaries. And it's not the Gen Zs that are going out and discussing those nature documentaries on Snapchat, right? It's the older demographic who are finding out about it, doing some research on it, and consuming it. I think we'll go in circles till eternity, but I come back to Hemma's point around it needs to be a combination of all the above. You need to be able to say, what is the demand for this particular nature documentary in my local market? If I'm going out, like as an acquisition executive, you're never going out and saying, oh gee, do I license Game of Thrones or do I license Planet Earth too? Like that's never a decision you're going to make, right? It's always, do I license this drama, or do I license this nature documentary or this nature documentary? Because in your mind, you're licensing for a particular audience group or to fill a particular gap that you have. And so there you need to combine, all right, one, let me compare the demand for both of these nature documentaries, but two, as an exec who also has 25 years of acquisition content experience, what do I think works best in my local market? And then combining both input points.
So sorry, if you don't mind, got to really, when we first started working with Parrot, it was my concern. My concern was, is it only early adopters that are going to be captured by this demand rank score? Because those are typically the people firstly in the know, eager to watch brand new content that hasn't necessarily been launched yet. That was my concern exactly. As sort of times progressed, platforms such as Facebook skew 40 to 55-year-olds now, and in terms of what they're doing online and what they're searching for, we can't make that assumption anymore. It's not just the early adopters that are looking online for content. And sort of the point that I made earlier about talkability and word of mouth that content creates, it's not demographic specific, it's content specific. So if the content is so good, everybody's talking about it and everybody wants to watch it. So it doesn't, in my view, doesn't make a difference, or the early adopter skew thing has been disproven by our own, work.
Have
think
you
this
ever
is-
had a sort of a point where you've had the data suggesting one thing, but your sort of gut feeling as someone who's been buying content for a long time has sort of said, no, that's the one over there, and gone against the data?
Many times.
Always.
And it's the art versus science thing, right? And I've got Andrew, my head of content, laughing. We have this debate on a very regular basis. And sometimes that intuition, it comes back to that art versus science thing, but that gut feeling about, I know this is going to be fantastic. Actually, I'll use an example. So Philip K. Dick's show, Electric Dreams, we hadn't seen any of it. We knew it was a fantastic writer. He had an amazing track record. We weren't seeing a lot of stuff online in the early days, and we're seeing a lot more right now. And bless Andrew, he was absolutely, I don't care what the data says, not quite, but almost. This is going to be a fantastic show. It's going to be massive. And so we went with our gut. And I think that the data will come back and prove it later, but those decisions are made so early on that the data wasn't necessarily available either. So that industry experience or that intuition or that creativity, that can't be discounted in the world of, multiple sources of data and research.
To try to add something to this, it's true that content creation is one of the strategic requests from broadcasters and the industry. And because now it's a global world, everyone is trying to sell content from, I think we have so many Russian content coming, this MIPCOM, it's interesting. It was not the case 5 years ago. So every country wants to develop new content. So the content curation and content selection, it's a complex work. I think it's a mix, but I think data is used to give a trend. When you want to have a hit or a program on several countries, when you want to be sure that you could be scalable and have it on different platforms, looking at data is key, but you need to also look at audience drivers. And that's why at Eurodata we have recently a media research group. We have bought a London-based company called Tape Consultancy, and this company is really on audience drivers, on looking at what is it, the cast, is it the production, is it the story, is it the novel, which makes the audience coming. But and what is interesting is they are also using the data to make the analysis. This company. So I think it's a mix. We have a tool of tracking new launches in the world, which is called Nota, New on the Air. In this tool, we track 10,000 new program per year, and we put ratings. We put a video, we put the cast, but we put ratings on the first audience, on the first episode, because people need to know at least, did it work? Okay, perhaps there is local differences. There is, some country it could work, in some country it can't work, but we see that they also, some global franchise exist. Homeland is a global franchise, The Voice is a global franchise, and many more. So and some Versailles French series is a global franchise now. So I think it's a mix, but as we are more and more in a ROI, return on investment system, you may have guts, but it's always good to have some perhaps true assumptions.
We've got about 3 minutes to go, so just sort of get a few wrap-up thoughts here. From an SVOD, VOD platform's perspective, Hema, do you feel now better equipped to make decisions over what you buy, as compared to when you first set out to do, to become an SVOD platform in New Zealand?
Absolutely. I guess when we were one of the first SVOD platforms in New Zealand, and no studio necessarily knew us. So we were very, we just wanted to secure some content. Now 3 years on, we have the opportunity and the ability to select which content we buy for our audience, and it's very, very different. We've learned a lot about our audience. We have a lot of data at our fingertips. We have real-time information as well. We've integrated some of parent information into our own data warehouse. We can make those decisions in real time using real customer information and have a fantastic relationship with the studios where we can buy that almost selected off the shelf, not quite, but almost.
And Warid, from your perspective, what will be the next big area that you guys need to sort of investigate and get better at transmitting to the guys in the audience?
I think is helping people understand that there already now exists a platform agnostic measurement system where you can measure the demand for content even before the content is available in your market. And that's a point I've repeated 3 times now, because it's people sometimes, I still find like that they find it difficult to first like, no, not really, you can't do that. Like that program is not even available. There are no ratings for it yet. And yet we can still assess, we can still measure how popular that show is in your local market, even before it's available in that market. So I think it's just conveying that and helping people understand that that's now available, and you can now start to make decisions across the value chain, you know, whether you're a buyer or a seller, but also whether you're an agency, a brand, or a studio.
And from the Eurodata perspective?
At Eurodata, we have around 250 clients in the world, and they almost have the same strategic issues. Content curation, so we just talked about, attracting the young adults, and how do I understand this new 4-screen measurement? Because this is a new way of monetization, because this is, you know, a unit of reference, a currency. And on that, I think it's tracking these new usages is key, because we need to understand, you know, we are in the middle of, or at the starting of the new road, and everyone is starting to and I think it's a circle. If you understand you know, these new usages, you will be able, or the industry will be able to keep the young adults either not perhaps on a TV set, but on a mobile, on a PC, on a tablet, and to have a, you know, to be sure that you know, the industry will keep on going, because if there is no monetization at one stage, it might be quite you know, dangerous for all of us in the room.
So there's a lot to think about. I think it's really interesting and lively debate. So can you give the guys a round of applause? I think it's really interesting. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the session, if you'd like to talk to the guys, they are here. And so, yeah, do feel free to come down to the front and have a word. But for now, guys, thank you very much. Have a great MIPCOM.